Our next speaker is Kaycey Bowie. And Kaycey is proudly Filipina and Vietnamese American. They have been an outdoor educator, Peace Corps volunteer, and National Park Service employee. Kaycey is pretty stoked to have spent the last year thinking about food, culture, and fish. Kaycey is one of the prospective students that I think that they followed us on Instagram for a while before deciding to come here. And I just remember Risa being like, oh, Kaycey is so great. Like, we can't wait till Kaycey gets here. They're so engaged. They're always like, liking our content. And so we were really, really psyched when Kaycey decided to join us. And I think that Kaycey always knew that they wanted to, I know that you knew, you wanted to marry food systems and communities in a project here. And so it was just really awesome to see the way that you were able to create a capstone project that did very successfully, I think, marry those concepts into what we're gonna see today. It's also just been cool to see the way that Kaycey has used the program to their advantage to open up so many professional opportunities. It just seems like doors are opening all over the place for Kaycey, and they have really come alive as a storyteller over the last year as well. So really excited to hear about this project, which is entitled Seafood, Culture, and Connection, a community-based response to food insecurity in San Diego during COVID-19.
In 2017, I moved to the Philippines to work with fishing communities. Oh. I was also called to move back to my mother's homeland in an effort to figure out what being part Filipino meant to me. But I struggled to learn the language, and as I stumbled over words that felt mostly foreign on my tongue, I realized that there was a shared language that I was already fluent in: food. In the first few months, when I could barely speak to my host family and was caught in a flurry of vaguely familiar but mostly new surroundings, there was always recognizable tastes, smells, and meals that grounded me. I felt like my own family was with me when I slurped up sinigang, my favorite soup. Please note this is not a picture of sinigang. I bonded with reserved, gruff-looking fishermen as we shared a merienda, or a midday snack, of freshly caught sardines made into kinilaw, a dish similar to ceviche, which we ate right off the fishing boat, or banca. And I carry these experiences with me as I sought to learn more about marine conservation here at Scripps. In looking for a capstone project, I knew that I wanted to study something that was meaningful to me and connected food, culture, and the ocean. That's when I recalled seeing Instagram posts of the Fish to Families program, a community food distribution effort being promoted by San Diego Filipino-American chef, Philip Esteban. The program came about at the onset of the pandemic, when life changed drastically for all of us. Here in San Diego, unemployment rates skyrocketed, particularly affecting the southern San Diego neighborhoods, including Otay Mesa, Chula Vista, and National City. Many of the jobs that were lost were in the restaurant and food service industry. Likewise, fishermen were also greatly affected, finding they no longer had customers to sell their catch to, a large part of their market being restaurants and institutions. Along with this, there was an increased number of San Diegans who faced food insecurity, those who did not know where they were going to get their next meal. Food insecurity reached a peak of 39% in the county, again, most noticeably impacting these same southern neighborhoods of San Diego. In an effort to address these tandem issues, fisherman Pete Halme and Chef Philip Esteban partnered to create the Fish to Families program with funding from the San Diego Foundation. Fishermen were able to be paid for over 19,000 pounds of fish, and chefs broke down this fish to yield just over 8,400 pounds of meat. A total of 28 fishermen, 12 chefs, and 12 charities worked together to provide nearly 39,000 meals to San Diegans in need over a 14-month period. Food was distributed throughout many of these neighborhoods that were facing the highest rates of food insecurity and unemployment. In a meeting held in January to debrief the impact of the Fish to Families program, Chef Phil said something that caught my attention. He mentioned that he felt a responsibility to find work for his fellow chefs and help give back to the communities that raised him. He felt called to be a part of Fish to Families in the spirit of bayanihan, commonly translated from Filipino as brotherhood or community. Bayanihan is a core Filipino value. It is the uniting strength that helps communities recover after devastating typhoons. It is the outburst of unified laughter at a family party. It is the feeling of familiarity between those who have shared a meal together. I was surprised that Phil would so readily name a cultural value that may not be immediately recognized or understood by the rest of those in the group. And I wanted to know more about this chef community that Phil described. So for my capstone project, I sought to interview the chefs involved in Fish to Families and better understand their shared experiences. During the program debrief, it was shared that chefs involved not only benefited from being employed during this time, but also learned new skills and developed new relationships with fishermen. I wanted to explore these outcomes and answer the question, what exactly did these chefs benefit from being involved in the Fish to Families program? So over the last few months, I met with and conducted informal interviews with 6 of these chefs. Most of our conversations were held in food halls, at coffee shops, or at restaurants, a natural place to find them. With their consent, they agreed to let me record and share clips of our conversations in order to better document and share their stories. Throughout these conversations, chefs identified 5 main benefits from participating in Fish to Families: the relationships built, the skills developed, the respect gained for fish, the opportunity to connect to culture, and the unique educational experience. In collecting these stories, I wanted to ensure that they could be shared in their voices. I utilized a story map as a way to visually and audibly share their experience in Fish to Families. As you scroll through the story map, you can explore immersive maps relating to COVID-19 effects in San Diego, learn more about similar seafood donation programs that started across the country, and listen to clips from our conversations. 2 of the outcomes that I found particularly meaningful were learning about the connections chefs made to their culture through working with fish and the unique educational opportunities chefs had during this program. At first, I was nervous to bring up questions about culture and identity. I wasn't sure if this was reasonable for me to ask about in a program that was meant to focus on fishers, chefs, and food insecurity. What if these questions were not as important as I believed? But after encouragement from my committee, particularly Dr. Isabel Rivera-Goyaso, I recognized the importance of examining and highlighting culture and identity in every part of our lives, and that these aspects are indeed valid to discuss in a space like Scripps. And I'm glad I stepped up and incorporated these topics in my conversations with the chefs. I was moved to hear Chef Jan, who recently moved from the Philippines himself, share how participating in Fish to Families helped him feel reconnected to his cultural roots.
I really find it fulfilling when I was doing Fish to Families. It reminds me of going back to my hometown, gutting and cutting fish again. It takes me back home, and I feel humble that I'm trying to respect this. I'm bringing new life to this fish and transforming it into something else. I don't know, it's a beautiful thing.
Additionally, as chefs began to establish deeper relationships with local fishers, they recognized that many of the deckhands who work with them were also Filipino. Chef John shared that he visited the docks one day and locked eyes with one of the deckhands. There is a nearly universal sixth sense that Filipinos in America have, in which we can almost always identify kababayan, or another Filipino. Chef Jan said, "Hoy, kuya, Tagalog ka? Hey, brother, are you Filipino?" Chef Marcus also shared his experience in connecting with Filipino deckhands.
A majority of the deckhands are actually Filipino, and being Filipino, it was really cool to see, and getting their stories and seeing what brought them here. And obviously they were fishermen over there, and they were able to jump on a boat and come here and fish here. So just knowing that was learning that was pretty cool.
From the start of the pandemic, Chef Philip searched for a way to support his fellow chefs and employees, which led to the start of Fish to Families. Chef John refers to Phil as an older brother figure, or kuya, and recalls how Phil was pulled to help as many people as he could through the spirit of Bayanihan, community.
I think that's why Phil felt like he had to be the kuya more as some more of a personal thing with Phil. Yeah, the spirit of Bayanihan is definitely like a thing for him. And I know that's why I'm here, that he also wanted to like reconnect to his Filipino roots at the end of the day.
A connection to Filipino identity is also a connection to food and community. These cultural connections made the experience of Fish to Families richer and more memorable for the chefs involved. Another outcome that stood out to me was the chef's process of learning during this program. The Fish to Families kitchen was a learning environment. Chefs were breaking down anywhere from 300 to 800 pounds of fish 2 times a week. In traditional kitchens, they either receive fish frozen and already cut into fillets, or if they do receive whole fish, only the head chef will work with it. In the Fish to Families kitchen, each chef had a hand in breaking down the fish. Chefs also had the opportunity to learn from one another and moved on from the program with a better understanding of the importance of mentorship. Chef Dominic describes how his time at Fish to Families has influenced how he now runs his own kitchen.
Since Fish to Families, my chef skills have honed up. Beyond the fish skills are gonna come with repetition regardless, but me doing Fish to Families and now being here, like I could teach everybody how to cut fish. You're gonna come off the clock, and like, if you want to cut fish, this is the time I'm gonna have it, and we can do it together. So if you guys want to learn, like, that's how we pass that torch.
Another notable outcome of chefs forming relationships with fishers was that they saw firsthand how their fish was getting to them. This led chefs to reflect on their ecological impact, and they wanted to learn more about aspects of fisheries and sustainability. Chef Marcus talks about this more.
Meeting the captains and hearing how they feel about the ocean and the respect they have for the ocean and the sustainability, their practices here are done very well, in my opinion, and I feel like they respect the ocean very well, our San Diego fishermen. That's another reason that it gave me a lot of passion towards the ocean and wanting to get involved beyond just the fish. Now I want to learn more about the science behind what's happening in there and what we can do to better our ecosystem in the ocean.
As chefs worked more closely with local fish and fishers, they also became more invested in learning about where the fish came from and passing on the knowledge that they had gained. The chefs that I spoke with hoped that the most successful parts of Fish to Families could one day be replicated through an educational training program. More cooks and chefs could learn the value and ecological benefit of working with local, sustainably caught fish and seafood. Hopefully, then inspiring them to integrate these locally sourced ingredients into their menus and making it more accessible to a wider community. A training program could also give many chefs and cooks the opportunity to learn about San Diego food systems and gain highly valuable kitchen skills. It could also involve building definitions of sustainability, developing an understanding of fishery science and surrounding policies, meeting with the fishermen of San Diego, and going to places like Tuna Harbor Dockside Market, and also much more. But in order to achieve a program like this, continued funding will need to be realized. The Fish to Families program was funded mainly by charitable donation. When society started to reopen and life began to return to normal, focus on continuing community feeding programs had shifted elsewhere. Because of this, the project ultimately ended. For Fish to Families to continue in any form in the future, they will need to be able to secure more consistent and reliable funding. So this story map, of which you've been seeing some clips, and the stories that the chefs have shared can be used to help garner such funding by raising awareness of the benefit of these types of programs for the general public and being included in things like grant application packages. Chefs also had many ideas to raise funds for continued programming. They include an annual fundraising gala, quarterly seated dinners, or even selling a cookbook focusing on utilizing the often discarded parts of the fish. Our food systems can benefit from more community-based food distribution programs, especially programs like Fish to Families, which provided an immersive educational space for chefs to learn new skills, establish meaningful relationships with local fishers, and encourage heightened awareness of the ingredients that they use. Furthermore, learning and cooking in a way that was culturally relevant made the educational experience more meaningful and memorable to these chefs. As chefs, they can make local sustainable seafood more accessible to their customers and continue to contribute to a more interconnected and strengthened food system. Food is our universal language. It is culture, it is connection, and by amplifying programs like Fish to Families, we can help make our local food systems more informed and resilient. I will leave you with one last quote from Chef Phil. Oh, here it goes.
The longest standing growth of Fish to Families was we had 12 cooks that worked with us. They all learned how to break down all these different fishes whole. Now all these chefs have gone on and used that knowledge and experience and are running their own stores and their own restaurants. And now they are the ones that go to the market. They're teaching their cooks and now their cooks are doing it. And it's this ripple effect, right? And now these fishermen are having a personal relationship with chefs. And now, when they order something, they at least think twice and say, hey, I'm not going to buy tuna from whatever store. Like, I'm just going direct to the fisherman.
Thank you to my Capstone Advisory Committee, Sarah Schaffler, Teresa Talley, Isabel Rivera Collazo, and Raz Salvarita. Chefs Philip Esteban, Marcus Twilliger, Sydney Imlay, Jan Tejada, Joe Estevez, Dominic Hernandez, and special thanks to support from Ernest Brazier, Teresa Cao, and Pete Halme. Maraming salamat, daghang salamat, agyamanak, thank you.
Great presentation, Kaycey. I was wondering, historically there's been a lot of data in San Diego that our fresh fish doesn't really make it more than 2 miles inland. So I was wondering what effect Fish to Families had on that statistic and whether reviving the program could address seafood access inequity.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Jean. I do recall that statistic as well. As I mentioned, most of the highly affected neighborhoods that were facing the highest rates of food insecurity and unemployment were more based in southern San Diego. Of course, there's also more of the inland communities as well, but all of the food distribution organizations were also mainly focused in National City, Chula Vista area as well. So for this particular version of the project, it was mostly stayed in these areas, which are still more closer to the ocean, but when I was talking to Chef Marcus and Chef Phil, they had dream goals of being able to bring a project like this all along the coast that would still focus fish distribution closer inland, but I believe there is value and definitely should be considered when thinking about building on these projects to bring that fish more inland as well.
Hey, Kaycey.
Oh, hi.
One of the things I liked about your project was that you were looking at elements that other researchers that are looking at these kinds of projects across the country didn't look at, the culture and the impact on chefs. And I think digging into that intuition and your curiosity is important in social sciences and will serve you well if you continue down the path of social scientists. My question is, did you have any challenges in collecting this information? And given all the information you did collect, do you have any recommendations for overcoming those challenges for other burgeoning social scientists?
Yeah, I got a lot of feedback from my committee that trying to get a hold of these cooks and chefs may be a challenge, and that I might have to just show up one day and ask for people to talk to me. And during my time in Peace Corps, I did things very similarly, showing up to different communities and talking with fishermen, so I figured that this is something that I could do. Was still very difficult. I showed up, so many of my cohort mates know, I would just go to Liberty Public Market and walk around asking if folks were involved in Fish to Families, because many of the cooks and chefs were now working in establishments here. I would recommend to start early. This is sage advice that I received from Ernest Frazier as well, especially when you have a short amount of time, to give yourself a couple extra weeks to put out those feelers, establish those relationships, and that was something that was really important that I learned as well, and built upon my past experiences in order to get data that is true and representative, and stories that are meaningful. You will have to start to create a relationship with the folks that you're hoping to work with, because otherwise people will not be as likely to open up, and nor will they trust wanting to share their stories with you. So as you can probably tell, this was a very important and meaningful project to me, so I made that very clear.